What's going on, everybody? I am Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is John Daigle. Daigle, buddy, I see you've made it home. It looks like you are back from the Fantasy Football Expo, as am I. It was great to see you for a few days there, and now it's good to be chopping it up. What's going on, buddy?
You and I have overlapped a lot in the past, given both of us lived in LA at the same time, but then and also getting to meet Justin Boone for the first time this past weekend. I was just happy to see everyone. And I think we all learned a little bit extra about each other that we probably shouldn't have.
I was going to say, yeah, it was a great time. There may have been some mistakes made along the way, which we will not get into here on this program, but it was a hell of a time. Yeah, we probably all learned a bit more about each other than we needed to. Spent maybe a little bit more time together than we needed to, but it was great to see you, man, and it's great to be with you today, chopping it up about the quarterback position as we begin position preview week here on the podcast. But before we get into that, one big fat announcement. Do you like me? Wait for it. No, you don't have to answer that. Do you like this podcast? Yes, of course you do. You love Justin Boone. You love Scott Pianowski. You love Nate Tice. You love guys like John Daigle that we bring on as guests. Well, big news. We are bringing on the Yahoo Fantasy crew to Las Vegas in a couple of weeks for a Yahoo Fantasy kickoff weekend. Friday, August 22nd. Saturday, August 23rd at the Venetian Resort in Las Vegas from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. on both nights. You can catch me, Boone, Scott, Nate, the rest of the crew at the Yahoo Sportsbook inside the Venetian. We are going to have a meet and greet, a fantasy Q&A Saturday night. We're going to share our 10 biggest pieces of draft advice before the season starts. You absolutely don't want to miss that. Again, that is Friday, August 22nd, and Saturday, August 23rd at 5 p.m. Pacific at the Yahoo Sportsbook inside the Venetian Resort in Las Vegas. Also, it's free $99, $0.0 for you. So come on by and talk some fantasy football with us. Yeah, I absolutely can't wait to travel through the Charlotte airport again, Daigle, as I got delayed for multiple hours last night. Definitely came home at 3 a.m. Another town with a bunch of alcohol in it. Definitely, absolutely what I need here in August as we prepare for the season. But what the people need, John Daigle, is our quarterback take. So in this show, We're going to break down the quarterback position in full. Everybody does tiers. We're going to do a little bit of tiers here on this show, but for fantasy and for us, here's the categories. We've got elite guys, we've got safe guys, we've got the mobile quarterbacks. That's the appeal basically of their fantasy outlook. We've got some sleepers, and then we've got just the rest of the group here. So these aren't necessarily how we rank them. We're just trying to put the guys into categories for a fun way to talk about it. So let's get into the first group here. That's the elite players, the top three this year, Daigle. And this is, again, the elite of the elite. These are the top three players in Yahoo ADP. Josh Allen right now is the consensus quarterback number one. Lamar Jackson, who is my quarterback one this year. Curious to hear how you rank this. And then Jayden Daniels has, of course, now made his way into this group as well. All of these guys are going inside the top 30 picks right now in Yahoo ADP. Daigle, I love this group. I often find myself, if they're available in round 3, kind of gravitating towards one of these players. How are you looking at this quarterback group right now?
Let's start with this big four of Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts, the guys that we know add both ceilings through the air and on the ground. Josh Allen's a pretty easy one to discuss. Top 2 quarterback in each of the last 4 years. We understand where both his floor and ceiling is, so we are comfortable drafting him in his range. Lamar Jackson is the interesting one. I think I'm pushing back on a little. And the rushing floor is so safe, it's not like he's going to fail us necessarily. But when we talk about how to handle the position in fantasy, we all have to remember we're still playing this dumb little game that we all enjoy so much. And so I say, how does Lamar fall back even a few points? And I think I can direct everyone to how. And that is because Baltimore's 74% touchdown rate inside the red zone was the highest of any team in the last 4 years. So we already assume that number is unsustainable. But then you start to dive deeper and you ask, how did they score all those touchdowns? And you notice that his 32 red zone touchdowns led the league, and that's the concern. Because if you include Lamar and Joe Burrow last year, they were only the fourth and fifth quarterbacks to reach that 30 touchdown mark inside the 20 in that 4-year stretch. And the other three guys that previously reached that number regressed and only tossed for 24, 20, and Stafford when he had 7 because he was injured the following season. And so I do think there's a reason that all of these numbers then instead suggest that maybe they run for more touchdowns. And if that's the case, maybe Derrick Henry is the leverage we need at the first, second round turn instead, and we can wait on Lamar Jackson instead, grab one of Jayden Daniels or Jalen Hurts.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really good case on just the regression part of it. I have a tough time. I mean, the reason that I just have Lamar number 1 is because I think of these 3 offenses, I think I have the most faith in this ecosystem as a whole, right? I think that the offensive line, you probably might give the edge to Buffalo because I think were the better unit last year, just slightly. There's a lot of continuity there. They've had great health, luck, and continuity the last couple of years, but I still think this is a good unit here. Maybe some questions at the guard position, specifically Andrew Voorhees taking over there at left guard in Baltimore. But I also think if I'm breaking ties in favor of which pass catching group I like better, I think I like the Baltimore group better than the Buffalo group. So my case there for Lamar is maybe a little bit less analytical, mathematical than yours, which means it's probably wrong. But that's sort of why I've broken ties in favor of Lamar. And honestly, it's sort of a rankings just thing here, because ultimately I kind of wait for the signal of, oh, someone else has taken one of these guys. If I want to grab one of them in round 3, I'll maybe be the second or the third, like I was for one of the drafts at the Kings Classic this weekend at the Expo. I ended up taking Jayden Daniels in round 3 just because, again, I didn't like any of the running backs or wide receivers that were on the board there. From an overall rankings perspective, this tier of quarterback appeals more to me, Daigle, than necessarily the tight ends there, some of the wide receivers, T. Higgins, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Mike Evans, and so on and so forth.
That's why I like Hurts in that range, because he's still going after, as you mentioned, Jayden Daniels, but he's not going in that elite group of tight ends like Trey McBride, George Kittle, whenever they fall. When you look at Yahoo ADP, Hurts is still being treated as the lower end of this spectrum, when I do think, unlike Lamar, we should expect him to increase on his production last year. The last 2 seasons prior to 2024, the Eagles averaged 31 and 33 pass attempts per game. Last year at 26, which is not only the fewest in the league per game, but the 4th fewest attempts per game since 2014, a long time. And the common thought that I believe everyone's leaning on is that it's because Saquon Barkley changed their identity forever. But I'm not sure that's the case, given that A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert, and Jalen Hurts, they all collectively missed a combined 17 games. They just practically never overlapped until the postseason. So I do think there should be reasons here we are getting Jalen Hurts, it sounds crazy to say, but actually at a discount compared to his ceiling, not to mention he averaged more rushing points per game than Jayden Daniels as well.
Yeah, the funny thing too, we look at the Eagles, obviously the fall off in 2023 from when they made the Super Bowl run, to then when they made the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl last year. Their offense actually, from an efficiency standpoint, was better in 2023. They were 3rd in success rate in 2023. They were much lower than that last season. A lot of the change for the Eagles was the defense went from a group that was problematic to rebuild completely in one off season. And I think that has a bigger influence on their philosophical trends last year from a run play call perspective, how heavy they were in neutral situations. Because they were in a lot of positive game script situations. That's why they had to establish that thing a little bit more. They're always going to lean run heavy. They're always going to lean run heavy with Hurts under center. They're always going to lean run heavy with that offensive line. But worth noting, as we found out over the weekend, I think this was Sunday when this happened, Eagles Pro Bowl guard Landon Dickerson is thought to have suffered a meniscus injury to his right knee, according to Adam Schefter. Dickerson is getting additional options to determine the next course of action, how long he's going to be sidelined. So any sort of ding at that offensive line it's problematic for the entire offensive ecosystem, but especially the run game. So I'm with you that I'm not writing it in pen this year that the Eagles are absolutely going to be as run heavy as they were last year, even if they'll still probably be somewhere in the top 10 in terms of run play percentage.
those four guys we mentioned also, there should be a tier break to the next individual and Joe Burrow. And that's when I start pushing back even more, if only because, and remember, I'm not saying anything we haven't heard the last decade. Our good friends who have appeared on these shows as well, late round quarterback himself, JJ Zacharyson, Sharp Football's Rich Rebar, they built their brands for the past 10 plus years in fantasy football on tacking on rushing production late, because that's what replicates stand-up pocket quarterbacks. And that's where I get worried about drafting Joe Burrow, because we've done this the past few seasons. Think about the quarterbacks who have averaged less than 2 rushing points per game, as opposed to these big top 4 we're mentioning. Tom Brady in 2021, he's drafted as the QB8 in 2022, finishes at the QB18. Just last year, coming out of 2023, remember, Dak Prescott treated as a top 8 quarterback. CJ Stroud was the QB5 in ADP. Last season, those two guys, Stroud in particular, finishes the QB24. It's just hard. And that's not to say Joe Burrow is now going to fail completely and the Bengals offense is going to collapse, but it's really hard to spend, in my mind, that elite draft capital based on who Joe Burrow is going around other positions when you do not add anything with your legs, regardless if you are an elite passer like he is, because again, you are still getting it done one way. And when that one way fails, how do you respond after that? And so I still prefer to think George Kittle or that back end of wide receivers, Mike Evans, who's a winner after Chris Godwin's injury. I still tend to lean on those guys instead of Joe Burrow and want that tier to fall more, and I'll jump on afterwards.
Yeah, it's just full transparency. Like for my tiers, I have the top 3 guys in their own group, right? Like beyond what the groupings that we're doing here, I've got Lamar, Josh Allen, Jayden Daniels. And then the next tier, like kind of the 2 guys there, it's Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow, just like how we have it grouped here. For our categories, I have these guys as kind of like the elite-ish. There's a little bit of a discount, but the more I hear you talk, Daigle, and the more I've kind of looked at this too, just from an ADP perspective and just my own tiers, I actually think maybe Burrow just belongs in his own kind of no man's land group. Now, in fairness, ADP wise, it's not quite like that. He's actually pretty close to Patrick Mahomes in overall ADP, which in Yahoo, which we'll get to the Mahomes part of this in the next group after the break. But I don't know, maybe Hurts has a better case to join truly like tier 1 than maybe being closer to Joe Burrow based on kind of how you're breaking it down.
And that does not mean we have to draft him tier 1. That's why your tiers are also baked around Yahoo ADP, which is important. It's the time of the year we have to note these things to everyone, because that means they can wait and still get that player in Hurts that I believe has a higher ceiling than Burrow, significantly higher, and should be treated in that first tier. And that's how I've pretty much been baking my elite quarterback builds around. Also, clearly love a few other guys that we're going to discuss as we move along in your tiers.
When you are on the clock, and you start to get to a point where it is a running back or a wide receiver, like who's the signal player, a couple names to you where you're like, all right, these guys are the top of the queue. Like I think I might just go with a Hurts or a Jayden Daniels or one of these guys, if you're not necessarily taking one of the top 2 players.
When we were at Terry McLaurin of wide receivers, and in the range of running backs after Amari and Hampton, Breece Hall, and Kyron Williams. So I guess the exact name to cut off is James Cook and Kenneth Walker. That's when I say these individuals may profile as low-end RB1s at their ceilings, but think about what Jalen Hurts instead actually brings to your team. He breaks the game of fantasy football if everything goes correctly, so I'm going to take that shot every time.
James Cook goes a little weirdly early in Yahoo ADP. Like Yahoo drafts, he goes kind of like right around that top 30 picks, which I'm not really taking him there. It sounds like you're not either. So I definitely think those are 2 really good names to bring up. Yeah, like the Chuba Hubbard, Alvin Kamara signal. Like once those guys are at the top, I don't mind those players necessarily, but I just think I actually really think I can build a pretty good case of why those guys can be nice RB2s in a full PPR. If you're like me and you went 2 wide receivers and a quarterback in the draft that I did over the weekend, I actually can just close my eyes and say Alvin Kamara full PPR maybe can give you like running back 1-ish production in a really gross, disgusting, don't watch the games, just look at the box score way. But those guys to me, I think, are better 4th round values than 3rd round values. So I do think that's the range where, just like again I said this weekend, I'm starting to look at Jayden Daniels there. Is there any reason to be concerned about any of the top 5 guys we've gone here beyond like how they score points, like a Joe Burrow rushing perspective? Do you have any like environmental concerns with a Buffalo or a Washington, or and this can extend to Philadelphia or Cincinnati? Is there any one of these teams? Look, they're all great offenses, right? To score a lot of points. It's the reason why these guys are high here. But is there anything kind of keeping you up at night about this group?
Beyond the reasons I already mentioned, I do think this is how the category should fall. It's just a matter of the ADPs that we're debating right now. But no, other than offensive line mentions, I know you mentioned the interior situation for Baltimore, but honestly, both Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are anomalies at their position. So I may be arguing something that does not matter whatsoever, and we've just wasted time on. So no, I think these guys are rightfully the top 5. Maybe someone with higher rushing floor that we talk about comes into play at QB5 overall instead. But I think ADP, at least not where they're drafted, but ADP in terms of how they're ranked, does have it correct.
Yeah, I think ADP has it correct. I think the industry as a whole is correct on how these guys go off the board right now. The only thing I would say, and this is why I have Jayden Daniels 3 as opposed to Lamar 1 and Josh Allen 2. I would say that if there was one of these offenses that maybe takes a step back from the efficiency level that it operated at last year, I think that Jayden Daniels and the Washington Commanders probably is the one that I would be the least surprised by. And that's mostly because we've seen it multiple years in a row with Todd Monken and Lamar Jackson. We've seen it multiple years in really like a year and a half now with Josh Allen, Joe Brady, but Josh Allen is Josh Allen. Honestly, the only reason, Daigle, that I am still convinced that the Commanders can be kind of a fringe top 10 offense. We did top 10 offenses for Football 301. I think I ended up having them like 11th in my rankings, so just off the top 10. The only reason I think they're even in that conversation is because of Jayden Daniels. So this isn't even a Jayden Daniels problem here, but like I just look at this depth chart right now. It's really not that inspiring from a skill position player standpoint. I know that these guys, Terry McLaurin obviously had a career year last year. Under Jacob Gibbs has shown that if you remove sacks and like scrambles, he actually did have a much better yards per out run number than he did in previous seasons, which makes sense. He had the best quarterback play of his entire life. Obviously he had a career high touchdowns, but it's August 11th and he still is in this hold-in situation with no real end in sight. We've seen like when these situations drag on, he maybe starts the year slow. He is also a guy that is coming off like an unsustainable touchdown rate and is entering into his 30s. Deebo Samuel, I just think Deebo Samuel's a very limited player at this point. Noah Brown's the other starting outside receiver. Zach Ertz is back again. Like the running back room is it's all right. I just don't know if they necessarily have the juice for me to pencil them in as the exact type of offensive efficiency that we got last year from them, if that makes sense.
They also, in hindsight, played the league's easiest schedule, where now, if you just look at last year's pass defense numbers, they have the 5th toughest schedule of opposing pass defenses this season. And like a lot of guys will eventually get to, remember, Jayden Daniels was treated similar to how Drake May is being treated, where he's drafted outside the top 12 quarterbacks, a fringe QB1, but now we're paying a top 4 price of him because of that rushing floor, whereas we don't get that discount anymore. And we're going to say the same about a lot of guys as we move along, that we don't get that discount anymore. So let's question their current prices.
All right, like I said, we're splitting hairs here at this top tier. I'm not fading Jayden Daniels by
That's
any
why I'm struggling to reach for something to talk about because they're really good players.
Right, I literally just drafted him over the weekend. So again, that's just explaining why he's the 3rd member of that 3-man tier. But you've definitely got my gears turning about whether Jalen Hurts maybe actually belongs in the 1st tier as opposed to the 2nd. But we are going to take our first break. When we come back, we're going to talk through some players that maybe have some more warts and some appeal as we go through the draft board right after this. All right, we are back. John Daigle and I are continuing to work through the quarterback board here. Next group of guys here, I kind of have bucketed as the safe guys. These guys, these feel like we know that we can trust them, we can trust their offenses, and if healthy, I think they can push for quarterback one finishes. Now, again, this is not how I have this group ranked. This is not based on ADP. I'm more so looking at like quarterback type here. So, Daigle, the names I've got in sort of the safe and steady group here. Patrick Mahomes, who is QB6 in consensus rankings. Dak Prescott is QB10. Brock Purdy is QB12. Baker Mayfield is QB7. Justin Herbert, QB13. Jordan Love, QB17. Jared Goff, quarterback 16. So, do you kind of agree that these are pretty much known products, or is there anyone here you think maybe does not belong in the group?
Known products for sure. If anything, let's talk about a couple players I do believe may be overlooked, undervalued perhaps, starting with Brock Purdy, if only because of the situation last year. Still finished, by the way, as the QB10 in points per game, despite everything crumbling around him. This iteration, in fact, that's going to be on the field for the 49ers this year, and eventually Brandon Ayuk, but George Kittle, Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, Christian McCaffrey, they literally played 10% of San Francisco snaps with Purdy, and even then, he still finished in as a top 12 quarterback. Any ball knower and film watcher like yourself, Matt, you can attest it was definitely Purdy's best season of his career so far, even though he didn't have all of his talent. And so now we're talking about everyone being healthy, Trent Williams included, and playing what projecting as the league's easiest schedule for the 49ers. So I think this is where, as we argued throughout the offseason about Christian McCaffrey being an elite pick at the back end of the first round, loving Pearsall and Jennings as undervalued wide receivers, and George Kittle as an elite tight end, it all also trickles down to the conductor of this offense, and that is Brock Purdy for fantasy this year.
Oh man, I'm really like dangerously Purdy pilled. I've always kind of liked Brock Purdy, but I just really had a blast watching him last year. He's kind of become a little bit of like a Tony Romo player to me, which maybe that's going to be sacrilegious to some folks, but I think he has stylistically some similar traits. Like he does definitely try to write some checks that but his arm can kind of cash him, man. He's not the most talented, guy in terms of arm strength, but he is aggressive. He pushes it, and he just showed a lot more, I think, improvisational ability last year, ability to play in chaos. He's not just a guy that kind of colors in the Shanahan lines. And it was really his work as a runner last year that I think was extra inspiring. 0.8 EPA per designed rush last year. That was up there with like Baker Mayfield, who was a really good scrambler last year. It was better than some of your favorite rushing quarterbacks last season. He was also pretty useful as a scrambler as Brock Purdy, 300 yards as a scrambler last year. Very solid in that regard, 12th among quarterbacks in scramble yards last season. So he's not obviously the runner that some of these other guys are at the top of the position, but like he might be kind of in the Joe Burrow bucket, or maybe even actually a step ahead of Burrow as a runner. And while this 49ers offensive ecosystem, of course, still has questions, you mentioned Ayuk, who Adam Schefter told us today, or I believe Kyle Shanahan told us today that he expects Brandon Ayuk to could be back by week 6. So that's sort of the estimated return right now for a guy like Brandon Ayuk, which I don't think is shocking to see. He might not be back till week 6. Significant knee injury he's coming back from, but I love Ricky Pearsall. I think Brock Purdy and Ricky Pearsall's connection really took off by the end of the year. Juwan Jennings is a nice, solid player. George Kittle and McCaffrey are healthy right now. So I don't know. I have Purdy ranked as a top 10 quarterback, and he's somebody I end up with often in later quarterback builds.
And the individual who I think loses out in terms of ADP and should swap with Brock Purdy, not only Jared Goff, who we'll discuss in a bit, but I think Baker Mayfield may not belong in this tier of players as well. Love the development that Baker Mayfield had last season. And yes, it's an internal promotion for Josh Grizzard in place of Liam Cohen at offensive coordinator this year, which does mean maybe they carry over the same scheme and play calling and helps alleviate Baker's situation. But also, you mentioned Jayden Daniels' touchdown rate. This is an individual that finished with a touchdown rate that was not only a career high mark, but 2 full percentage points above that previous career high mark. Not to mention a career high in fantasy points per game as well. So we're just questioning, is this sustainable at a significantly higher ADP than 2024? And I'm not so sure it is. So someone like Brock Purdy is who I want to take instead. But again, because we're arguing about ADP, you don't have to. You can wait instead.
Right, totally. And it's not that I'm all out on Baker Mayfield this year. It's just the ADP, which you mentioned, which in Yahoo leagues 60th overall ADP on Baker Mayfield as the QB7 in consensus rankings. I still have him as a QB1, 12th in my quarterback rankings, but that's a significant divergence from where he goes. So I really don't end up clicking Baker Mayfield very often. And Daigle, to the point of what last year was from, just an efficiency perspective, the Buccaneers offense was top 4 in points per game, EPA per play, and success rate. And I'm not saying that this group is going to be the 2023 unit, because I think the offensive line is much improved. That's a big reason, along with Liam Cohen, that the unit was what it was last year. In addition to, okay, now they have Bucky Irving. They didn't have Bucky Irving before. Now they have Emeka Egbuka, making that wide receiver room even deeper, along with Jalen McMillan in year 2. So again, I'm not saying they're going to go back to 2023, but in 2023, this Buccaneers offense was 20th in points per game. They were 27th in success rate and 17th in EPA per play. So even if they split the difference, and still more positive in the splitting the difference between what this offense was in 24 and what it is going to be in 23, with a left tackle that might miss multiple games and Tristan Wirfs to start the season, yeah, that would be pretty problematic for a guy like Baker Mayfield going in the top 60 picks in Yahoo leagues.
And he's one of the last quarterbacks who will actually talk trash to opposing defenses. So we need him to sustain this production and be good to keep football fun. I do also want to pivot to another player you mentioned, because I get why you did it, but a lot of people are not discussing someone like Jordan Love in this range. And I think you did so correctly. I'm actually very excited to see what the Packers offense will become this year, because Matt LaFleur was hired in 2019. And look what happened last year with Jordan Love suffering 2 significant injuries throughout the season. Before last year, the Packers had never averaged fewer than 33 pass attempts per game. They finished averaging 28. Before last year, Green Bay hadn't registered any lower than a 58% pass rate in neutral game script. They averaged 49%. Last year was not who Green Bay wants to be. And then all they did was go out and add a first-round wide receiver who can stretch the field. So I do want to try to soak up this equity that no one sees and just win outright with Jordan Love, even in a one-quarterback league, because that's the one person that no one's really tacking on while taking shots on their receivers to soak up this ambiguous target tree.
Really glad you brought up this Jordan Love inclusion here, because it feels like Jordan Love's getting a lot of crap off of what happened last year, and it's a year where he was hurt from the very beginning of the season. Like week 1 in that messy field in Brazil, he hurts his knee, and I think that just cast the season off in a completely different light than what they wanted it to be. You mentioned from a structure perspective, also from a results perspective. Like, here's the deal. Quarterback's probably not going to be hurt all year, and the wide receivers probably are not going to lead the league in drops again like they did last year. Although they were dropping the ball all over the place in their preseason game. I don't know if you caught any of that between all the fun at the Expo this week. But, yeah, they were dropping the football all over the place, which not the best, but we'll move on from that. Over the last 2 years combined, the Packers are 4th in touchdown rate with Jordan Love under center, obviously, for most of those games. So it's one of the more productive passing offenses in the league. Where are you at with Matthew Golden right now? Jayden Reed's in a boot. Matthew Golden's been getting a lot of pop over the offseason. He was 3rd in success rate versus zone coverage among the prospects I charted this year, so I think a very good player. He's somebody that's steaming up draft boards, and kind of honestly, Daigle, if we're bullish on Jordan Love as a sneaky QB1 this year, I think that has to include like a good Matthew Golden rookie season.
I think all my arguments for being a Matthew Golden bear previously will also be deemed as dumb now, since Jayden Reed was shown with a walking boot out of nowhere, not reported at all until we saw this past weekend. And so we'll have to see if that lingers into the regular season. I was personally concerned about Golden as a prospect, if only because his rise was solely for his 40 time and nothing else. Also, never registered a 16% target share in any season in college, struggled to earn targets. And then you mentioned his successes against zone. Pro Football Focus at least charted his yards per route run against man coverage as the lowest in 2024 among any receiver drafted, anyone in this year's class. And the league has for 5 years in a row now run more zone coverage. We know that's the way it's headed. More deep safeties to defend against deep shots and deep plays. So, but I still like when my college receivers when I'm writing up profiles actually can separate when you leave them one-on-one. And so even in being a speedster, I have still personally struggled about Golden having the highest ADP among all the Packers wide receivers. But then again, as you said, we're still banking on Jordan Love and what we expect to be a pass-heavier offense. And Jayden Reed now may be removed for a little bit, along with Christian Watson, who may not play at all this year. So I think ultimately after this podcast, I probably will teach myself to get higher on Golden, especially since you mentioned his zone stats.
Yeah, worth noting, Jordan Love did have his thumb taped in practice today, but not a big level of concern at this point. Just, of course, injuries, baby. We're back. So the success rate versus zone was definitely the strength of Matthew Golden's reception perception profile. His man coverage, 68.5%, is a 44th percentile mark in reception perception, which is not like 44th among all prospects ever. It's among prospects that I have charted. So that's worth like the contextual element when we're talking about this. But so I'd still put it as kind of like it's average-ish for him, but he can definitely rip it downfield. And you mentioned like how heavy zone coverage the league is right now. So it's important for the fact that he is that style of zone coverage beater, especially on the routes where the Packers were not winning last year, which was a lot of the deeper routes down the field. Other than Jayden Reed, like Jayden Reed was the only one getting open down there. So prior to this weekend, before the Jayden Reed walking boot situation, Daigle, I had it as these guys were in the same tier, but Reed was multiple spots ahead. Now I think until we get more information about Reed, I'm basically going to keep it same tier, but flip and have Matthew Golden ahead. And just a guy that you should draft, honestly. At this point, you should just take him because he goes so late in Yahoo leagues outside of the top. Both Emeka Egbuka and Matthew Golden, both guys I think you should be taking, still go outside the top 115 picks. So you might as well just go ahead and get your shots on those guys. Round one players who are at a discount because of ambiguous situations. So if we're high on the Packers passing game, I think we got to be higher on some of these guys that go way, way later. I mean, Golden, Tucker Kraft, even Jayden Reed when he's healthy. I like that you called out Jordan Love. Is there anyone else in this tier that maybe you have some skepticism about? Again, the safe and steady type players.
Two players that come to mind. One is someone that's going to be shoved as a top 7, top 8 quarterback, and I would have been all in along with everyone had his situation stayed the same. But Patrick Mahomes is slowly losing more pieces here, and whereas I was high because we were going to see a healthy 3 wide receiver set for the first time ever, his best 3 wide receiver set he's had for his entire career, that's no longer the case given the Rashee Rice suspension and then Hollywood Brown's significant injury. So the guy that had finished as the QB 14 and QB 13 in points per game the 2 seasons prior, I kind of think we're getting that once again, at least in the first month or 2 of the season, despite being treated as a top 7, top 8 option. So I am worried about Patrick Mahomes, and he's more expensive than the other guy I'm worried about even more, and that's Jared Goff. The last show we did together, I talked about Jared Goff, just the entire environment being completely different, losing Ben Johnson for John Morton, who hasn't called plays since 2017, losing his entire interior offensive line, including an all-pro center in Frank Ragnow. And that's been Jared Goff's numbers, is that when you compare the EPA per play, the pass rate, everything, yards per attempt drops when he's under pressure compared to standing upright from a clean pocket. And I think they're going to be under stress quite a bit this upcoming year, given that they no longer have Ben Johnson to free Jared Goff and make him have immense success. So I'm very much worried about Jared Goff, fresh off career highs and touchdowns and touchdown rate, and do believe he instead should swap with Jordan Love, honestly, go in that mid-range, low-end QB2 spot when that's not how home leagues are treating him at all, instead drafting him as a top 10 quarterback.
if we're looking at, again, 2022 to 2024 touchdown rates, 6% is Baltimore Ravens. That's number one. Buffalo Bills, number two. Lions are number three. So I do think of those top three teams, they have the most change, the most, honestly, it's not the same level. Jared Goff, good quarterback. I like watching Jared Goff play quarterback, but there's levels to this thing, and I don't think he's on Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen's level at this point.
And your rankings suggest as much. You have him ranked as the QB 17 when, again, that's not even close to his ADP. So you're practically saying the same thing I am.
Yeah, I am. And consensus rankings are with it too. You know, he's QB 16. So there's a pretty good departure from how drafters are treating Jared Goff and how like the industry is ranking him. So we'll see how that goes and how that ages. But yeah, I have definitely been like just to put it in context, that one guy we haven't talked about yet and one guy that's in this group that I do kind of want to get your thoughts on. 96th overall is Kyler Murray. 101st overall is Jared Goff, and 101st.4, so like right, basically the same thing, is Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott is ranked as QB 10 in consensus rankings. Kyler Murray's 11, and Jared Goff's like 16, 17. So there's just a disconnect between drafters looking back at last year and then trying to project forward to this year. So yeah, Goff is a guy that I'm okay as like a QB2 in SuperFlex, but not somebody that I want to have as a QB1. Just real quick, Dak Prescott. This is another situation that, man, every time I look at this Dallas Cowboys passing offense, I get more and more excited. The running back room is not inspiring. The offensive line could be pretty good in the interior. I'm all in on George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb. Dak Prescott, somebody you're comfortable with as a QB1 or no?
Absolutely. Someone who also bakes into my plans at quarterback if I miss out on Jalen Hurts. And it's because Dak is practically the opposite of Baker Mayfield, Bizarro Baker, and finishing with career lows in touchdown rate and points per game. When, remember, if we strip away 2024, back in 2023, not that long ago, Dak was the QB5 in weekly points and second in MVP voting behind Lamar Jackson. He was that good. And now we're giving him his second best receiver, I'll argue, in his career. If someone wants to put Amari Cooper at the end of his prime or rookie year Michael Gallup next to George Pickens, I'll listen. But George Pickens getting deep with at least the best quarterback of his career is going to open up everyone, CeeDee Lamb included. So I'm someone who drafts CeeDee Lamb over Justin Jefferson comfortably when I'm looking at wide receiver. And I also look at the range that George Pickens is going and make sure I put him at the top of that tier because I want this entire offense, Dak Prescott included.
100%. We're in lockstep on the George Pickens ranking. Let's get to the next group of guys here. These are just three guys that I think the basis of their ceiling case is their mobility, is their rushing. We know that the top four guys we discussed earlier, that's a big part of why their ceiling is up there. But these players were mostly counting on it for that. That is Kyler Murray, who is QB9 in consensus rankings, 97th overall ADP. Justin Fields is consensus ranking 11. Bo Nix is consensus ranking 8. And I want to start with Bo Nix here, Daigle, because I didn't intend to do this, but I'm way off of consensus on my quarterback rankings with Bo Nix. So tell me why I'm wrong having Bo Nix like multiple spots away from his QB8 consensus ranking. It's, by the way, 69th overall ADP in Yahoo League. So drafters are taking Bo Nix rather aggressively too.
And I don't think you're wrong. So I'm the wrong person to ask this question because what you did without meaning to, is take last year's ADP, since no one treated him as a top 24 quarterback, and he was in that jumble grab bag we took in SuperFlex leagues, just crossing our fingers, and cut that in the middle with his current ADP. And so I think you are more correct. And that's because, yes, Bo Nix can scramble, but he wasn't necessarily a scrambler. 6.7 carries in his first 7 starts, and then it faded entirely with just 4.5 over his last 11. The rushing was inconsistent. Not only that, but the offense was catered to make him successful. And this is not a knock against Bo Nix. I think what we got out of him as rookie year is extremely promising considering his profile. And now I'm high on him as an NFL starter for the rest of his career. But only Tagovailoa had a higher rate of throws behind the line of scrimmage. And think about how we're treating Tua right now as a low-end QB2 compared to Bo Nix's ADP. So I'm with you. I do think Bo Nix belongs in that mid-range QB2 alongside Jared Goff, but our draft rooms are not treating him as such.
Among top 10 quarterbacks last year in fantasy points in half PPR, only 2 guys were below 7.5 adjusted yards per pass attempt. That was Bo Nix and, ironically, another guy in this tier, which is Kyler Murray, who we'll talk about in just a second. So just like, again, I think those guys were boosted up a little bit, mostly from the rushing ability. But, yeah, with Bo Nix, I'm skeptical that they keep that sort of you mentioned they started cutting the scramble stuff out, like any of the designed rush attempt stuff as well for him, because now they have, like, fingers crossed, a real running game with J.K. Dobbins in the mix, R.J. Harvey, obviously drafted in the second round here. That's a badass offensive line that is really well coached and is very talented. That's ready to be one of the better rushing ecosystems in the NFL, Daigle. And I think they have 2 backs who could take advantage of it. So I like the Broncos offense, but how high can they really fly in terms of, points per game, right? Are they going to be one of the top 10 offenses in the NFL? I'm not 100% sure they have the difference makers at pass catcher to do that, but let me put it this way. I'm not anti Bo Nix. I don't think he's going to have a sophomore slump or anything like that. I just think that he and the team can get better, and it won't necessarily reflect itself in the fantasy results, if that makes sense, because this is also one of the better defenses in the league. They probably aren't going to be in a lot of pass-first scripts. So to me, it's just – and honestly, Daigle, it's more so my rankings are telling you to avoid that range of quarterbacks that we talked about earlier, which is – Patrick Mahomes at 51st overall, Baker Mayfield at 60th overall, Bo Nix at 69th overall. Like, that's just not, I'm not taking my shots there. I'm telling you, wait on those guys, forget about that, and go for that Purdy tier, the Dak Prescott group as well. But let's talk about Kyler Murray here. I don't know. What is there to say about Kyler, dude? He is what he is now at this point. It's a little frustrating. I'm a little bit low on the Kyler Murray experience at this point. Not from a fantasy perspective. I still have him ranked as QB7, but he's again in that group of players I'm not really drafting all that often.
You've asked me now 2 or 3 times about Kyler Murray, and if you couldn't tell, I've avoided it every time because he's genuinely my least favorite player and my least favorite offense to talk about, just because we're doing a lot of wish casting personally. Kyler Murray is coming off of a career low 4.5 carries per game and has even mentioned this offseason that he doesn't want to run. He just does it to expand the offense.
Yes.
So will that continue going into this year? I don't know. Even though he does have this top 7 ranking at his position that I'm personally even questioning. And I usually dip out for, actually, if you want to know how I draft, for Dak Prescott and a couple others we discussed. Not only that, but Marvin Harrison Jr., usually common to take in the 3rd, 4th round turn. You know better than anyone, like, we are really asking, does his route tree expand? Because it can. He's that good, but it doesn't matter what I think he can do. It's a matter what the team wants him to do. And so I genuinely don't know. Again, if you ask me right now what I'm doing with Kyler Murray, he's a fade for me. He's a player I'm avoiding just because I think I can match his production with Dak Prescott and Drake Maye, who we haven't discussed, and I can do that 3 to 4 rounds later. But curious on your thoughts about how you're treating Kyler.
Oh, God, I mean, you said it really well there, especially about the rushing stuff where I saw Scott Barrett resurface a post that Coach Speak Index had a little earlier in this offseason when Brian Schottenheimer, the Cowboys head coach, was talking about hiring Clayton Adams, who, of course, was the offensive line coach in Arizona. And he mentioned that, and this was like a very passing quote from Schotty, from Brian Schottenheimer, that he just said, yeah, Clayton would tell me that, like, Kyler Murray would come to him in some weeks, be like, I don't really feel like running this week. I just don't really feel like doing it. It's like, and I have some of the same hangups with Fields, because he's told me I don't really I'm really not trying to run that much and all that, but I just don't know if he's going to have much of a choice because of how they're going to design the offense. And I think there's going to be a lot of design rush attempts, not a lot of passer, not a lot of guys to throw the football to in New York. So if I had to pick one who's going to be more of a proactive rusher, it will be Fields. Although, dude, like that happens with some of these guys. Like they have the ability, but they don't want to because they don't want to get smacked around out there. They don't want to get hit. Or, yeah, they want to be quarterbacks. So that's something that isn't discussed enough when we talk about these quarterbacks in fantasy, Daigle. And I think Murray, in addition to all of the just the design of the Cardinals offense of it all, that is a part of the equation that doesn't get brought up enough with him from a fantasy perspective.
It's what happened to a lesser extent with Aaron Rodgers last year, where that the Jets offensive line collapsed. And there's a reason why he was the quickest in the league to get the ball out, because he did not want to take a hit. It happens where these offenses crater because of how the quarterbacks are playing. And so I'm personally worried about Kyler Murray when we start talking about him with Patrick Mahomes being drafted right after Joe Burrow.
Yeah, and on the Marvin Harrison Jr. stuff, there was at least and I know Nate posted this clip. Of course, it was total bait for me. Like, it was just perfect little, just a quick inbreaker, anticipatory throw from Kyler over the middle of the field. I'm like, yes, let's get more of this. And, Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't out all the way outside on the boundary running like some big sacrificial X receiver route. Like, we need a lot more of that from Marvin Harrison, and I need to see a lot more of it than just week 1 of the damn preseason, buddy, to think we're getting some kind of different passing game design. So again, I have Murray ranked at QB7, but I will say from a transparency perspective, just not really in the range where I'm taking any of those guys. Like, I don't really, in the top 70 picks, just I'm looking at my overall rankings, after Burrow is off the board, I don't really consider any other quarterback, because I think there's it's so flat. Like, it really is flat from QB6 to QB17, Daigle. And there are a lot of sleepers to talk about at the position too, which is what we are going to do on the other side of this break. We're going to talk about a bunch of young guys mostly heading into their second seasons, some rookies as well, that could be fantasy football sleepers, especially in your SuperFlex formats. We're going to get to that right on the other side of this quick break. All right, we are back. As I mentioned before, we have a bunch of sleeper quarterbacks here as John Daigle and I continue to work through the quarterback landscape. Again, these are not rankings. This is not like my tier or anything, but just group of players that, again, mostly are in very early in their career, second, third year type players. We got Drake Maye is consensus ranked QB 15. Caleb Williams, consensus ranked 14. Trevor Lawrence, who is the only guy in this group that is on a second contract and actually maybe doesn't even fit, because we've seen him have like a top 12 finish before, but he is the 18th ranked quarterback in consensus rankings. We've got CJ Stroud, QB 19, JJ McCarthy, QB 20, Bryce Young, QB 22, and Michael Penix at QB 24. So a lot, again, group of young players here, Daigle. I'm just going to give you the floor, and I think I know where you're going to go because you brought this guy up a couple of times here on the podcast. Who's somebody you really like in this group?
Drake Maye is someone that I have semi-jokingly mentioned then I'm not letting anyone in the industry victory lap at season's end because it's all too obvious he's going to break out and be a top 12 quarterback. So I myself won't be victory lapping when Drake Maye is amazing given all the changes around him. Improving to Josh McDaniels, who I mentioned this on a past show with you, but I want to reiterate to everyone who's just tuning in these last 3 weeks for the regular season, and that is, in the last 10 full seasons, Josh McDaniels has been allowed to finish calling plays for an offense. 9 of 10 of those offenses finished in the top half of the league, 88 PA per play. What we always dunk on is his head coaching tenure and decisions as a general manager, not his play calling. And now we get I shouldn't say improved offensive line, but I'm assuming it can't be worse than last year, given at least some of the pieces they've added, including the number 4 overall pick in this year's draft and Will Campbell at left tackle. Not to mention that we talk about the rushing quarterbacks being able to replicate potentially the production of some of these quarterbacks who are instead fading at a top 12 ADP. And in Maye's 10 full starts, he averaged 4.2 rushing points per game. So all of that leads me to believe, not to mention Stephon Diggs working from the slot, Kyle Williams potentially earning his way to play out wide and 3 wide sets. All of this leads me to believe that Drake Maye is absolutely going to be one of the steals of your drafts.
Yeah, I have him as QB 11. He's someone that I really want in my drafts. Like you said, no victory lapping. This is a Scott Pianowski favorite. When everybody on Twitter is victory lapping like the most obvious play of the week. Who liked Drake Maye? Everybody liked Drake Maye. I haven't found a fantasy analyst that's been willing to say like, don't take Drake Maye in your drafts this year. So yeah, he's definitely coming up. He's somebody that, again, I would like. He's kind of one of the last guys I'd be comfortable with as a QB1 that goes outside the top 100 picks. We get it. It's the rushing ability. It's everything you laid out there. We've talked a lot about Drake Maye this offseason, so we don't need to go too deep into there. I do want to ask you about Trevor Lawrence. QB 18 in rankings, a guy who's had a top 12 finish before. And sometimes, Daigle, you look at the rankings, you look at ADP, and you just think about, like, does this math work? And I'm specifically talking about how Brian Thomas Jr. is a consensus wide receiver 1. I think he's a really great second-round pick this year, and really interested in how he was used in the preseason. Because I was stuck in the Charlotte airport last night, and I'm a sick freak, I actually rewatched the first drive of the Jaguars. First team. I know. It was truly shameful. They were literally cleaning the food court around me, stacking chairs because I needed an outlet, and that was the only place that I could do it. And I'm like sitting there with a paper and got my headphones in. Like lady's looking at me. She's cleaning the floor. I was like, do I need to move? Because I'm doing some serious stuff here. I'm charting Jaguars wide receiver alignment on their first team preseason snap. Okay. But again, we're high on Travis Hunter. We're high on Brian Thomas Jr. We love the Liam Cohen effect. Does the math work out for Trevor Lawrence to still be QB 18 in fantasy and for all of those things to happen?
There aren't many guys like this either, because usually ADP catches on. Cam Ward, for example, is in this range, but all of his receivers are, except Calvin Ridley, are going at depressed ADP prices. And you could even argue that for a player who earned targets last year like Calvin Ridley, even he's being undervalued at his current cost. And so I like that argument, and that's what I use, is that not just the young offensive coordinator getting a head coaching job, because that has failed. We should be arguing instead, if BTJ and Travis Hunter are up here, then why is his quarterback down here? And that's where it is. Because right now, Trevor Lawrence, in terms of ADP, doesn't even fit in the mid-range with Jordan Love, for example. He's instead going well past that, and I'm just questioning if that makes sense. So when you are waiting, him, CJ Stroud, those are bets I do like to take.
Speaking of CJ Stroud, he's another guy. He's QB 19, right? Again, it's not quite the same way because, Nico Collins to me is a first-round fantasy pick this year, but all the other receivers are those depressed ADPs for sure. But we've seen CJ Stroud be. We people were drafting him. Not we. I didn't really take that much CJ Stroud last year. But at least I think I did maybe in one league. But he was going very, very high last year. By the way, that team stunk. Didn't really enjoy the experience. Thanks a lot. So not a great situation for Stroud last year from a fantasy standpoint. People have just kind of completely written off that there's any chance he bounces back this year. I did think this was interesting while looking at quarterback scrambling. From week 8 on, he was actually QB 12 in scramble yards last year. It's only 154, but he barely cracked like 200 over the course of the season. So this is the thing with Stroud, man. Like, remember when he was coming into the league and everybody talked about, well, he doesn't really scramble all that much. He doesn't really work outside his structure, except for that Georgia game. Remember, everybody would talk about that one Georgia game, right? And Stroud last year in chaos, with the offensive line falling apart around him, he actually did start to scramble a little bit and work out of structure because there was no structure to work in Bobby Slowick's offense. So there's really no, mathematical way to make the CJ Stroud like he's a breakout quarterback case in fantasy this year, but I think he's a good player. I think he's tethered to one of the best receivers in football. I'm really interested in their 2 rookie wide receivers. I think Christian Kirk's got something left. And honestly, because I think their run game is going to stink this year with Joe Mixon's injury and the questions on the offensive line, I just think they're going to have to throw the football an awful lot, Daigle. So some interesting notes for Stroud to consider because he's not a guy who gets discussed on fantasy shows now at this point.
It was the Georgia game, and I believe 11 carries against Northwestern. And I know because I was at that game just to watch CJ Stroud play, and it was incredibly windy that day. But anytime I mentioned Stroud as one of my favorite late-round QBs and sleepers at the Fantasy Football Expo, which you and I just attended, I will say the smartest minds in the room did always mention and push back with the offensive line situation, which, yes, is worrisome. And yes, I may be using an anchor theory here. We're saying just because where we changed the offensive line, we have 4 new pieces starting this year, but maybe that's not actually good. Maybe they just changed it and it's still going to be bad. However, at least it's different. And there's no arguing that CJ Stroud isn't a great quarterback. Remember, just last year, we wanted to draft him as a top 5, top 6 in ADP. And now all of a sudden, he finished outside the top 24 options. And now all of a sudden, he's being left for dead as a low-end QB2. I don't want to do that again, given that they did add significant draft capital with 2 more rookie wide receivers. And I think Christian Kirk can have success from the slot inside of Nico Collins. So I like this entire offense. I know it's a bet you have to hold your nose to make, but I think we're going to also see what happens in week 1 because we are playing indoors against the Rams. So if that's the case, if the dominoes fall correctly, this offense is going to have no choice but to cook and push the ball downfield. The opposite of that is Jared Verse eats CJ Stroud alive, and we can drop him and stream for the rest of the season. So I still like taking a bet on CJ Stroud, but I understand everyone's concerns.
I will just say from the offensive line perspective, I think sometimes overrate the talent on paper, like how much that matters, and underrate how much coaching matters on the offensive line. And the reality is, like, their rules and their protection plans last year were just bad, like under Bobby Slowick and that whole coaching staff. And if it's just if that part is better this year, even if the talent is still without a doubt not great, I think there can be, like, the offensive line can be good enough to not tank the unit, essentially. And I think it would have to be so bad. I think it would have to be so bad to tank this unit because I'm high on Nick Caley. I really like the pass catchers, and I think Stroud is a good quarterback. So that's just kind of final notes on the whole offensive line thing. I want to bring up Bryce Young here as well. Bryce Young, QB 22 in consensus rankings. I mentioned Stroud was QB 12 in scramble yards from week 8 on. Bryce Young returned to the lineup in week 8 after Andy Dalton's car accident. And he was QB 8 in scramble yards behind only Drake Maye, Jayden Daniels, Justin Herbert. That's an interesting one to find third there. Caleb Williams, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and then, Bryce Young. Bryce Young had the same amount of scramble yards, 231, right around like Lamar Jackson, 236, Josh Allen, 234, Jalen Hurts, 233. So he's a proactive scrambler. I think he does his best work, unlike Kyler Murray, when he just boots out and then is a decisive scrambler, or he resets and then can shoot it down the field, which we saw in the preseason to my guy Jalen Coker in the end zone. He scrambles out there, directs Coker into an open window, throws a touchdown against the Browns. When I wasn't sitting up at the bar with you, buddy, on the Friday night party at the Fantasy Football Expo, I was kind of locked in on that big screen watching the Panthers' first team offense because I really am interested in this unit. I love the way T-Mac's route tree was being expressed as that X receiver running intermediate patterns, digs, outbreakers, stuff like that. I just think this unit is going to be good, and that kind of leans me towards Bryce Young as a QB2 in Superflex, with the scrambling stuff just maybe being an extra layer there.
The top 6 selections of Superflex leagues, unlike regular 1 quarterback 12 teams leagues, it's the front that's better this season because you can't anchor with one hero quarterback and then wait and fill in that QB2 spot as you pick apart other positions until the later rounds. And I think Bryce Young should be part of that jumble that everyone grabs to fill in their QB2 spot, because to your point, it's those extra 4 carries and 22 rushing yards per game that he tacked on when coming off the bench for Andy Dalton to close the year. The Panthers actually got better too. They beat the Eagles if Xavier Legette holds onto the football. And now instead they add a first-round receiver who I know his profile differs compared to who you ask, but he's still comp to Mike Evans coming out of college. And we were still shuffling around Jalen Coker, hopefully a full healthy season of Adam Thielen. There's a lot to like here with a strong offensive line for the Panthers. So yes, Bryce Young is also in my plans for the QB2, QB3 of Superflex leagues.
Anyone else in this tier that you really like or want to highlight? Like a lot of these, again, guys in the year 2, year 3, etc.
Another one is Geno Smith, who I'm pretty comfortable with, just because if he is at full strength,
that's I have him grouped in the next one. If you want to just get to that next tier, which was just totally fine. Yeah, which is totally fine. That's just like the rest of the guys, which by the way is headlined by Matthew Stafford at QB 23. Worth noting that I said on the podcast that came out yesterday that Sean McVay told us Matthew Stafford's gonna be back at practice on Monday. Well, guess what, gang? We're here on Monday, and he did not practice with his back injury. Sarah Bishop of ESPN, I believe, yes, ESPN NFL Nation reporter covering the Rams, noted that Matthew Stafford was in street clothes, didn't appear to be practicing today. McVay said previously the plan was for him to practice today, and then he was in something called an immortal chamber, which helps with restoration and rejuvenation. Daigle, I know you run in some fancy, swanky circles, buddy. But do you know anything about an immortal chamber? What is it? And is it a normal thing for your franchise quarterback to be in the immortal chamber on August 11th?
It's the most Los Angeles thing I've ever heard of in my life. And will it help? I'm not sure. But, buddy, our ADPs in Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, they certainly needed to work because everyone looks at Jimmy Garoppolo's production in Week 18 of the meaningless regular season finale, but I'm still questioning, can that be sustainable and help carry these expensive costs for their other 2 starting wide receivers? So I don't know if it's going to work, but I know we need it to work.
It's going to be very snip, snap with this whole Matthew Stafford thing. Part of me does think, hey, maybe let's just check in week 1 and see what happens. But people are drafting teams right now, man. And again, until we know a little more clarity on this, again, like I said yesterday, hey, August 25th, Matthew Stafford's out there. He's practicing. I'm feeling pretty good about Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. Right here on August 11th, he's in the immortal chamber, whatever that is. Daigle, I think if you and I had stuck it around in LA a little longer, we probably could have found ourselves in an immortal chamber. Never say never. Never say never, but not yet, at least. So he's still in the immortal chamber. I don't feel as good about those ADPs right now, but let's continue to go through the list here. Geno Smith, who we'll double back to here, QB 25, Tua Tagovailoa, QB 21, Cam Ward, QB 26, Sam Darnold, QB 27 consensus rankings. I don't think it's really worth talking about Aaron Rodgers, the Browns quarterbacks, the Giants quarterbacks, the Saints, the Colts, none of that stuff. So we can just focus on these group of guys here. You mentioned Geno Smith. You like Geno in fantasy this year, or what are we thinking about this Raiders offense?
I might have some thoughts on those terrible quarterbacks rooms whenever we get to a Superflex conversation later on. But Geno Smith is one I'm certainly confident in because if he's healthy, we know he'll start 17 games, barring injury. And it is going to be a fun offense, I believe. We're talking about an offense that's indoors, first of all, and who Geno Smith as a quarterback. He's not a player who's going to rush around and really allow that to decide whether he's going to be a top 12 option in fantasy or not, but he is someone who is mobile and can escape the pocket. And we saw Chip Kelly with that national championship Ohio State team Pro Football Focus charted 84% of Will Howard's carries as designed by Chip Kelly. So Smith, I think, is mobile enough to where we see a fun RPA-based offense that's going to move quickly, as Kelly showed us with Philadelphia, UCLA, and then, of course, at Ohio State. Not to mention that this offensive line, while we still have major question marks with the Raiders, it did actually grade out better in ESPN's pass block win rate metric than Seattle's last year. And we know Geno Smith is also a different quarterback compared to clean pocket to being under pressure, including last season when he got to stand upright with no distress around him, having a 14-2 touchdown to interception ratio. Given their defense as well, like Justin Fields and the Jets, we know Aaron Glenn has elite pieces on defense and wants to play a run-heavy scheme. I think the Raiders want to play a run-heavy scheme, but they do not have those pieces to do so. So I think we get some firewall Geno Smith sometimes where just everything breaks loose and they have no choice but to be a 32-34 pass attempt team some nights, whereas we're not projecting them as such.
I think I agree with you on that. And that's why I haven't really been able to quite figure out how I feel about this Raiders team, this Raiders offense overall, because I've quoted this stats about how run heavy Chip Kelly was when he was an NFL play caller and an NFL head coach. But man, they do not have this. The secondary especially is so bad. And look, Pete Carroll is the Pete Carroll's the man. Maybe Pete comes in here and just sprinkles some magic pixie dust, and he's a great teacher of defensive backs, and maybe that's what they are. Maybe that is what they are fully relying on, because on paper it's a rough depth chart back there in the secondary for the Las Vegas Raiders, and they really only have Max Crosby as like a needle mover on the front. It's not like the best defense overall. How are they going to stay in those run heavy scripts? And then in that case, is Geno Smith just dropping back a lot? And how do you feel about the pass catchers there in that situation? We have Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is awesome. But it's a lot of young pieces in the wide receiver room after Jacoby Myers, who might very well be the most underrated receiver in the NFL, a guy that has multiple seasons over 70% success rate versus man, but in reception perception. But yeah, Dante Thornton, 4th-round rookie, is a starting X. Tucker and Jack Besh competing still at that kind of flanker spot. I don't know. I can't quite figure out how I feel about this Raiders offense this year.
And when
get these preseason stats off my screen. We don't need to care about get these preseason get that off my screen. Yeah, thank you very much, Colin. Appreciate that.
What we don't have to discuss about the preseason is that last year, after the Raiders traded Devontae Adams, Brock Bowers led the team with a 30% target share, but Jacoby Myers was forgotten and right behind him with a 26% target share. And that's honestly in my draft plan. That's why if I don't get Jalen Hurts, I dip out for a little bit until I come back to quarterback. And it's because I love, and I know you do too, that next range of wide receivers between Jamison Williams, George Pickens, Emeka Egbuka, Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings. I include Jacoby Myers along with that group, someone who should be valued much higher in redraft leagues when everyone's listening to this podcast. That's what they care about the most these next 3 weeks, in home leagues as opposed to best ball. So I think Myers is a value, one of the best values in fantasy this season. And so I'm definitely tacking him on.
Love your call out there. Like I said, there's a lot of players that I think are underrated because wide receivers are just there's so many good wide receivers right now. But yeah, Jacoby Myers might actually be the most underrated wide receiver in the NFL. A guy that I have at wide receiver 35 and like kind of the top of that group, but someone that I really want to take where he goes. Right now, he is the 108th overall player off the board in Yahoo leagues. Definitely a really good part of that strategy. Worth noting too, the Raiders were extremely pass heavy last year because their defense stunk and because they couldn't really run the ball. I think their run game will be better with Ashton Genty, even though he had -1 yards in the preseason, which I do not care about and I don't want to see on the screen again. But they were the 3rd most pass heavy team last year because, again, some of those situations. So worth considering when we're talking about the Raiders this year, and they might end up finding themselves in more pass heavy situations this year. One guy, he was actually in the previous group, I just want to touch on real quick before we toss to break. Michael Penix, QB 24.
Yeah.
I think a lot would have to go right for him to be a fantasy factor. And what I mean by that is that the Falcons would have to be right, because the Falcons are just like so sure about Michael Penix. There's anyone who's willing to listen, they're talking about how damn good he's going to be this year, not even playing him in preseason. But if Drake London's going to the moon, and I think Drake London is going to the moon, maybe Michael Penix can at least get to, the stars or the atmosphere or something and be a value, but he doesn't really have the rushing chops that we would look for in a fantasy quarterback.
But we know what this offense wants to do. And when Michael Penix came in, he led all quarterbacks in air yards per attempt. He wants to chuck the ball and get downfield, and he can do that with Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and we see who else they find, since we know they're going to be top 3 in 3 wide receiver sets, 11 personnel, as they were last year. So Michael Penix is also that guy who you cross your fingers and say a full season of this could lead to explosiveness, and dare I say could maybe even lead to him leading the league in passing yards because of also what this defense is going to bring to the table. So I agree with you. Yes. Michael Penix is another target of mine for SuperFlex leagues.
Michael Penix last year in his 3 starts, just give me a random guess. How many scramble yards do you think he had in his 3 starts?
Total 64.
14.
Because all he did was stand back and launch it.
Stand back and launch it. And I think for Bijan Robinson, he will get to that check. He's not going to like a high check down player, but he's going to check it down before he's going to scramble because he is not taken off as a scrambler. A couple guys who had more scramble yards than him in that 3-week stretch: Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Aiden O'Connell, Joshua Dobbs, like guys didn't even start games. So that's where Michael Penix is at. He had just one more scramble yard than Kenny Pickett, who I think played like a couple of drives. So interesting note there. More than Matthew Stafford though at 12. So there's that. All right, we're gonna take one last break, and when we get back, Daigle's been talking about SuperFlex. We're gonna talk through some SuperFlex strategy, maybe a couple of other rooms to target, maybe those disgusting quarterback rooms that we breezed past in the last segment. We're going to get to all of that right after this quick break. All right, we are back. SuperFlex has become a staple format for many in fantasy. Puts quarterbacks at the forefront of your team building, correcting the crimes of fantasy past, which has devalued the most important position in sports. So, Daigle, when we look at the quarterback position in fantasy, before we talk through some disgusting quarterback rooms and let you get into true sicko mode, how do you typically attack the position in SuperFlex?
One, just a quick peek behind the scenes. I think the producer's audio is still in my ear. And 2, as I go in to discuss quarterbacks for everyone, then I like to go beyond ADP because in being in a lot of 12 and 14 team sicko SuperFlex leagues, I can tell you everyone gets drafted. Daniel
Yeah.
Jones, the Saints situation, every quarterback is getting stashed and trying to box out the rest of your league. And so I like to dive deeper, and I'm not saying I'll always take 4, but I will piece together some interesting situations. Like maybe if I take 3, I'll take Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones to hopefully guarantee myself a starter. I'll take the Saints situation to close my eyes and just bet on an offensive coordinator, kind of like we're doing with Liam Cohen, except in a much worse situation, I know, but with Kellen Moore. I'll definitely take chances because I understand all these guys are getting drafted.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like if you've never played in a SuperFlex format before, you're listening to this podcast,
you're missing out. First of all,
you're number one. Yes, you are missing out. That was literally what I was gonna say. You're missing out. It's super fun. You should try it. Secondly, yeah, you're drafting every quarterback. Okay, forget about like, oh yeah, we didn't even touch on Sam Darnold in that last segment. QB 27 in consensus rankings. Oh, Sam Darnold is getting taken. Sam Darnold, that's a great pick, but it's a guy you're picking, all right? But like Daigle said, you're going to take Spencer Rattler just to see what happens. You know, he's getting drafted in this league. So, yeah, 100%. Like I really enjoy Superflex, and I enjoy the fact that, you know, you're taking some of these goofy quarterbacks. I typically, for me, in terms of roster building in these Superflex leagues, Daigle, I do. It kind of depends on the room, right? If I have one of the top picks, then yeah, 100%. Like I'm going to go with one of those elite quarterbacks. Obviously, I'm going to prioritize Lamar, Josh Allen, Jayden Daniels. I'll even take Joe Burrow early in a Superflex league, even though he doesn't have the necessary like big fantasy upside. It's tougher for me when we get to the next group of players and how I weigh those against high-end running backs and wide receivers, but I still want one QB1 I feel confident with. And then I don't mind, yeah, because I do really like a lot of those sleeper guys we talked about, the Bryce Youngs, the Michael Penixes, even JJ McCarthy, who we didn't touch on, but every time I was reading you off those like team touchdown rate stats, the Vikings are 7th in team touchdown rate since 2022. And like they've had a lot of different dudes play quarterback. JJ McCarthy, if he's good, even if he's acceptable, he's going to be a productive quarterback in that offense. I don't mind platooning that second quarterback spot with some of those younger players, and maybe one of them ends up. It's a little bit like streaming in season. You're hoping to go late round quarterback, whatever, stream, and then one of your streamers just you go from dating to married. You know, you end up locking them in as an upside pick. I don't mind approaching the second spot in Superflex that way.
That's what Superflex is. We are constantly asking ourselves every round when it comes back to us, what is the replacement level value of this player? Because even someone like a Tyler Shuck, we can predict and project when he's going to start. And that's more guaranteed points than banking on a receiver who's going usually in his range. We can project on them perhaps starting, but the actual targets that player is earning, that's when a backup quarterback, then it is better to pick. And so it's really just about consistently asking yourself, yes, like, is it worth it in this spot? Also, it's fun because there's always going to be the one person who is too tantalized by going the first 6-7 picks without a quarterback. Because, man, when you could start Malik Neighbors and Nico Collins, and it comes back, and sometimes Josh Jacobs or Kyler Williams is still on the board, and you just could tack on 4 receivers, an elite tight end, 2 running backs. It's hard not to do. Like, you have to be experienced in the Superflex streets. So yes, you should just always ask yourself the production value, the replacement level of this quarterback before you draft in the range of wide receivers and running backs.
Yeah, it can get really scary really quick when you suddenly end up with a QB1 of I don't know, Caleb Williams, and then, you know, QB2 Sam Darnold or something like that. Yeah. But if you wait too long, it can end up happening in a Superflex environment. So, Daigle, you said you have some notes deep into the quarterback position. So, I mean, pull on the gloves. I don't know, get into the muck here. What do you got on some of these disgusting quarterback rooms?
I'll tell you my 2 favorite, and that is, unfortunately, 1, Anthony Richardson. And I'm not even going to tell you stats. I'm just going to tell you.
Bother.
Let's start with who Anthony Richardson was drafted to last year in Yahoo ADP, and that is Malik Neighbors, George Kittle, and Joe Burrow. Now fast forward to who he's drafted next to this year, and that is Wan'Dale Robinson, Justice Hill, and Rico Dowdle. There has to be some kind of median for us to agree on and say when this player starts, this player who was the QB6 in ADP just last year and was being argued whether he should be ahead of CJ Stroud, there has to be some kind of median for us to agree on. So I'm going to go back to Anthony Richardson, understanding his rushing production whenever he's under center, regardless of the passing stats. And you can't tell me, Harmon, that's not cheap enough to take a bet on it.
Daigle, I mean, freaking
Justice Hill.
Bravo. Malik Neighbors to Justice Hill. That's just close it. Okay. Close the voting. That's going to be the best note that we have on this podcast all off season. You're 100% right. You did not need stats. Yeah, you should take the shot. Okay. Daniel Jones is starting the second preseason game after Anthony Richardson started the first, and Anthony Richardson immediately got himself lit up on a blitz protection on a mistake. And his finger is, bent sideways now. So that's not ideal. No. Yeah, it's not ideal. Look, but when he's out there, he's going to score fantasy points. And man, it's just a really good situation. That's what I keep coming back to with Anthony Richardson and anyone taking snaps for this Colts offense. The offensive line, maybe there's some holes there. Tanner Bortolini at center is taking over for Ryan Kelly. There's some transition there, but they've got such interesting pass catchers, and Tyler Warren's in the mix now, and he's out there for every single snap. Richardson just has to not be abysmal to be like a really good fantasy quarterback, but I don't know, Daigle, what's your confidence level on that?
I am not trying to sell you that Anthony Richardson is going to be an NFL starter anytime soon. I'm just letting you know we play this dumb little stock market game, and I look at this and say, in a SuperFlex league, he's going to get drafted, and I unfortunately want to be the one that drafts him. I'll give you one more, though, that may be worse. You can tell me. My personal opinion, I don't know what you saw and everything you did. I think Jackson Dart is the best quarterback in this class, regardless of Cam Ward getting drafted number 1 overall. The NFL did not agree with me. I understand, and I've been wrong in quarterback evaluation many times and will be many times moving forward. I believe that's the toughest thing to do. It's why I listen to guys like Nate Tice tell me what they see in the film. But what I do know is that the Giants are projected with the league's hardest strength of schedule this year, including their first 6 games against top 7 pass defenses from last year. Jackson Dart led this class in yards per attempt ahead of Cam Ward, both from a clean pocket and under pressure, and more importantly for our purposes, 5.5 rushing points per game the last 3 seasons at Ole Miss. Yes, it's a little bit due to the fact that he ran a video game offense under Lane Kiffin, but at the same time, everything he showed us in terms of passing and what he did from the pocket and outside of it made him a very good player that I believe is going to see the field based on this tough schedule that I do not think Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston can overcome. Not to mention the Giants' bye week is at the end of the year where we get at least a month to evaluate Jackson Dart in the fantasy playoffs. So I also like drafting Jackson Dart when you wait on your QB4, QB3 sometimes in SuperFlex leagues.
I like drafting Jackson Dart. Not something I thought was going to be said on the August podcast here in the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. But that being said, there's a part of me, like if you're drafting Malik Neighbors, that kind of wants Russ to hold this job, just because Russ can't do very much anymore. But he did lead all quarterbacks in yards per game last year on go routes and post routes, according to Fantasy Points data. And man, Malik Neighbors was so underutilized in go routes and post routes. Like he could really smash. Malik Neighbors could smash. Okay. But I look at the schedule. Our buddy Ian Hartitz made this point on Twitter today. Jackson Dart first start, assuming Russell Wilson's locked into week 1 starter, which he is. The earliest is probably week 5 after that rough start. It's on the road. It's the only game they're favored in all year against the Saints. That could be one. The middle is week 7 after Thursday night, that was the one when we had this breakdown at one point earlier this offseason. I was like, oh yeah, week 7, debuting in Denver, not great, obviously, as Hardest points out, but it comes after a Thursday night football game, so they get that like mini bye. And then the absolute latest is their bye week coming out of their bye week in week 14 into week 15 against the Washington Commanders. So it's just that like Harditz has 2 games highlighted there in the first 7 weeks of the season. So I think there's a chance Dart could be under center. I'm just not sure if that's great for Malik Neighbors. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But I don't agree with you with the Dart QB1 in the class because I did like Cam Ward, but I don't know. I will say I was impressed with Dart kind of standing in the pocket in preseason and ripping it under duress a little bit. You know, just stepping up in the pocket and letting it go.
I'm not comparing these two players at all, but we saw that when we talk about being worried about offensive lines, the transition from Jacoby Brissett to Drake Maye showed that good players can still max their offensive line and make them appear better. And at times even make them not matter at all to the scheme of the offense. Jackson Dart, to me, can be that player that transitions from Russell Wilson to where the type of player Russell Wilson is, he doesn't have time to launch moon balls deep with this pocket. But Jackson Dart will make it work because he can extend the plays.
That is very fair. Hey, anything good that happens to the Giants quarterbacks happens to Malik Neighbors, and we should want good things to happen for Malik Neighbors. Daigle, good things happened on this show, except when you said especially when you said the Anthony Richardson comparison. So I appreciate the hell out of you doing it. What are you working on right now that people can check out?
EstablishTheRun.com. Our team previews just finalized. Everyone knows Evan Silva's tiers to draft from, and lots of other work over there you can check out. You know the website. You know what to do.
Love it. And here at Yahoo, 28 days of fantasy continues to roll on. We are celebrating 28 years of Yahoo Fantasy with 28 days of fantasy promotion. Today's announcement, meet Assistant GM, a virtual co-manager for Yahoo Fantasy Plus subscribers. Roster tips powered by data sources, weekly alerts to never miss a lineup tweak, projected impact of each move that is now in Yahoo Fantasy Plus. You can check that out, yahoo.com/plus/fantasy. Sounds like something you all need, so you definitely don't miss those lineup adjustments you need to make. That is going to do it for today's show. Shout out to John Daigle for joining us for this one. Make sure you check out all of his work at Establish the Run. Position Preview Week rolls on with maybe the most important podcast of the entire year. Probably not. That might be overselling it, but it is the wide receiver position preview pod. Ray Garvin is going to join me live at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on YouTube on Tuesday. Until then, we are out.